Do you ever feel like your favourite game in a series is underappreciated, like it's being ignored in favour of another when it's actually the better game? Well, that's exactly how I feel about the modern Rayman titles, and in this video I want to discuss the design of Rayman Origins and why I think it's fundamentally a better title than Rayman Legends is. And on that note, let's get cracking. If you ask people to name the first modern Rayman that popped into their head, I reckon most people would choose Rayman Legends, or that stupid one about the rabbits, rather than Rayman Origins, and that should hardly come as too much of a surprise. Rayman Legends famously began life as a Wii U exclusive, but it didn't take long for Ubisoft to change their minds and announce a worldwide launch across multiple platforms, no doubt in response to how hugely the Wii U was underperforming. And the reception it received was universally glowing from gamers and critics alike. Legends took everything that made Origins so special and dialed it all up to 11. It introduced online multiplayer and expanded the series' offline multiplayer options, and also included a good chunk of Origins levels, a new single player campaign, and of course, those unforgettable music levels. In terms of both value for money and quality, it was an incredible package. But despite Legends taking almost everything that made Origins great and refining it, while at the same time also introducing plenty of new features for players to get to grips with, I can't help but feel like Origins' defining characteristic was somewhat lost during the process. And to understand why, I think we need to start by taking a closer look at the brilliance of Origins' design. Starting with the basics, in Rayman Origins players make their way through 4 different worlds before another 4 open up, each one expanding on the setting of those previous worlds and which can be tackled in any order. Spread across those worlds are 60 levels, with the worlds themselves all adhering to a similar structure. Players need to complete the world's levels and defeat their bosses, while at the same time collecting electoons and lums, the game's currencies, in order to unlock up to 3 different medals at the completion of each stage. It sounds like a lot of collecting to do, and it is, so it's fortunate then that Origins features controls that are some of the tightest in gaming, and some of the simplest to master as well. Players have the choice of walking or sprinting, they can jump and transition into a glide, punch and kick, slide, perform a spin attack, and my personal favourite, slam directly downwards during a jump. And once they've got the hang of things, they'll also learn that by sprinting, spinning and then jumping, they can build up an additional burst of speed beyond simply holding down the sprint button. Those I've just listed will be the moves players mostly use during their time with the game, but as they progress, they'll also unlock additional abilities including wall running and swimming, to name but a few. The added bonus of that progression, one rooted less in finding and gathering collectibles and more in pure gameplay terms, is that players will begin to realise those different moves chain together so well, so intuitively, that they're not limited to slowly making their way through levels. They can do it quickly as well. Soon enough, jumping immediately after a spin to gain momentum before executing a well-timed slam onto a jump pad to quickly cross an area begins to feel like second nature. Origins' brilliance is that moving through a level in this manner doesn't feel like something reserved for those who have mastered the game. It feels like the way the game is meant to be played, something that even casual players will begin to naturally gravitate towards. Moreover, I think this is something the development team might have realised too, but to adjust the entire game to simply be about speed would have removed most if not all of the sense of exploration, which is still a very entertaining part of the game in its own right. And so I think they did 2 things instead. The first was to introduce king lums. Larger than the regular lums encountered more frequently, coming into contact with a king lum causes the smaller lums in the surrounding area to turn red, granting players 2 lums on their counter instead of the usual 1 for a limited time only. While this is happening, a short melody takes the place of the level's music, a wonderful way to add a sense of urgency and a timer without having to resort to adding visual clutter in the form of a countdown or similar. Because increasing their lum counter is key to freeing additional electoons upon a level's completion, collecting red lums quickly becomes less of a nice to do and more of a have to do. The red lums essentially become a series of mini time trials encapsulated within Origins' many levels. It's an extremely clever way of encouraging players to think about moving through the game's environments in terms of speed as well as exploration, but without making it a necessity. Essentially, it subtly prepares them for the second of Origins' speed-based inclusions, that inclusion of course being time trials. As players progress through Origins, they'll unlock the option to return to many of its levels, but with a new objective, namely, to get to the end of them within a strict time limit. All players have to do to begin is smash the clock at the start of a level, and then finish it as quickly as they can without dying. If they do die, then tough luck, they're thrown back to the very start of the level to try again. There's no checkpoints on offer whatsoever. The first time players beat the clock, they'll unlock an electoon to add to their collection, and then Origins begins to really throw down the gauntlet, offering up a second time to beat in order to unlock a solid gold trophy. And it's at this point that the true genius of Rayman Origins design begins to become apparent. The first time players move through a level, they'll be exploring every nook and cranny to find all of its secrets, and I'd imagine there's a large part of the game's audience who would be happy just to take on that initial challenge. But if they begin to take on the game's time trials, many of which are very difficult, they'll realise that just like the flow of movement and the red lums encourage speed, so too does Origins' level design. They're designed in such a way that areas which include a risk of falling often include multiple platforms for players to use, laid out in such a way that they can decide whether to navigate them one after the other or more quickly skip across them. They're designed so that enemies can be positioned in such a way that they serve a dual purpose, as foes to be vanquished or as jump pads to maintain momentum. They're often designed with a choice of higher or lower paths, leaving it up to players to decide which will better facilitate their goal of getting to the end in record time. What many players will end up doing is analysing each level piece by piece, figuring out the optimal way to move through them so that they can go back to the beginning and attempt to string it all together. Origins, in its own special way, borders on, dare I say it, becoming a puzzle game as well as a platformer. Being that I'm talking about speed, you might be wondering why I haven't mentioned the tricky treasure levels yet either, considering speed is the only objective during those levels. Granted, they're great fun and present a welcome change of pace from the norm as players progress from world to world, and feature a cracking banjo soundtrack to boot, but the reason I've not brought them up until now is because since they're designed only for speed, I'd wager they were far easier to put together than Origins' regular levels, which had to account for both speed and exploration. But they do also serve a purpose, to ensure players who decide to take on the game's final challenge are ready to do so, as that challenge can only be unlocked by collecting all of the teeth contained within the various treasure chests players are tasked with chasing. If unlocking this final challenge relied solely on finding collectibles in the regular stages, there would always be the risk that players would unlock it, be completely unused to playing the game at speed, and quickly become frustrated. But by introducing the treasure chest levels as the means of unlocking it, developer Ubisoft Montpellier ensures that will never be the case. And of course, how can I finish discussing Origins without talking about the level which is unlocked when all the teeth have been collected, Land of the Livid Dead. A level designed only for speed, it's Origins at its most challenging, and the game's last hurrah, the end of a learning experience players have been taken on. They learn the basics of movement while exploring each level to find its secrets, they started figuring out how to move more rapidly through the game's use of king and red lums, refine those skills while taking on the time trials and tricky treasure levels, and they're then left to face the ultimate challenge of speed and precision. This is how a level should be designed if accounting only for speed, and it's one I'm sure had more than a few gamers tearing their hair out at one point or another. If the treasure chest levels were made to be relatively easy, to help players adapt to using Rayman's moveset to move at speed, then Land of the Living Dead was made to be on the border of being too hard for many, to give those who have been taking part in and learning from the time trials and tricky treasure stages one final test. It's definitely too hard to base an entire game around, but by softening the rest of the game's edges with a hearty dose of exploration and making moving quickly through Origins levels an optional challenge, Ubisoft Montpellier managed to find the perfect middle ground. Okay, so I've talked a lot about why Origins is such an extraordinary game, but what about Legends, I hear you ask? As a sequel, surely Legends simply took the best of Origins and doubled down on what made it great. Well, yes, but also no. Legends features regular platforming levels spread across a number of worlds like Origins, with a boss at the end of each, again like Origins. And it also features the aforementioned music levels in their own separate world, which again are marvellous and you should absolutely go play if you haven't already. Other than the music levels, none of that sounds too dissimilar from Origins, but it's in the way Legends handles time trials where the flaws compared to its predecessor begin to become apparent. Whereas in Origins every level serves a dual purpose, to be explored and to be completed as quickly as possible, in Legends time trials are kept completely separate. I know that doesn't sound like a huge change, but it completely removes an aspect of Origins which for me makes it one of the best platformers ever made. Where levels once had a duality to them, they've now been split completely in two, with exploration the focus of regular levels and speed the focus of the time trials. There's no option to earn a prize for completing a stage in record time built into Legends' regular levels, and the time trials feature no exploration at all. A platforming experience that felt so carefully crafted in Origins, one where everything felt like it was designed to cater to both sides of the coin, suddenly feels nothing alike in the sequel, and everything just begins to feel very segmented. That incredible moment I'm sure countless players experienced when they finally managed to complete every part of a level perfectly and collected a level's gold trophy is gone, replaced with specific time trial levels in Legends, which are still fun, but have nowhere near the same depth. And this move away from combining exploration and speed as perfectly as Origins did can be seen in other areas as well. The system for collecting red lums has been changed, so that now it's about gathering purple lums in a specific order. Instead of players having to think on their feet to collect them all before they return to their usual state, in Legends it's simply a case of collecting the first purple lum at the start of a chain, and then following the order purple lum after purple lum until they've all been collected. There's no rush, no sense of urgency, and players can usually take as long as they need. And as if that wasn't enough, King Lums have even been removed from the Origins levels featured in Legends, replaced by purple lum chains, some of the tricky treasure stages have been made easier, and time trials have been removed entirely. All of these things come together to paint a picture of a game which, while still brilliant, was clearly not designed with the same core principles in mind. Legends isn't a bad game, in fact it's a bloody brilliant game, and I would encourage anyone watching it to play it if they haven't already, but I can't help but feel like it could have been so much more. It feels like content has been added simply for the sake of adding content, rather than Ubisoft Montpellier going back to Origins to understand the fundamentals behind why it was such an engaging platformer, which is a real shame. At the end of the day, Rayman Origins is as close to platforming perfection as you'll ever likely find. Sure, it may not have Legends music stages, better multiplayer support and levels from its predecessor, but what it does have is a gameplay experience which at its core is far more cleverly designed than Legends could ever hope to be. Where Legends keeps speed and exploration well apart from each other, Origins not only embraces both, but combines them in a way I've seen few, if any, games manage to do quite as well. It may not be the modern Rayman which springs to mind first when players are asked about the series, but putting popularity to one side, it's not only the best Rayman title ever made, but in my view, also one of the greatest platformers of all time. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch the video, I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, do consider subscribing to the channel, your support means a ton, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.